in that case, can be relatively specific. And it came about because, well, it was before they were trying to come up with a headline. It was when they were sort of trying to figure out how to package this article. It came about because there were a number of phenomena that the author saw that had previously been thought of as different or had not been thought of all together at the same time. Examples of that being everything from, on the one hand, Mechanical Turk, and on the other hand, innocentive. And so this writer saw certain connections between these different things that were happening and believed that they were happening for similar reasons. And so that becomes the basis for an interesting article, to make that observation. And putting a word behind that becomes a way of getting people to read that article, first of all, and getting people to talk about it, secondly, and then also, I believe, allowing what was started in that article to become a broader conversation. Because in that article, Wikipedia was not an example. But Wikipedia is not only probably the prime example now, but the best place to go if you want to find examples of crowdsourcing is, in fact, Wikipedia, to read the Wikipedia entry on crowdsourcing. So this word, while at the same time it threatens to burst at the seams, this word does draw certain interesting comparisons between different phenomena, one of which might be to ask the question of what value we place on labor. Another question might be the question of what wisdom we place in crowds, and how has that changed as the crowd has been virtualized and as the crowd has become something that can be so easily leveraged. To use a couple words that have origins as nouns that have become verbs.
That is a corporate piece of jargon that is impossible to escape. People don't go to lunch anymore. They have to leverage lunch. You have to leverage everything, and to the point where it once had a meaning economically having to do with debt. Now everybody just leverages things because it gives you more credibility to leverage things than to actually do them. I think also just to what extent are these words sometimes invented to create an appearance of innovation, an appearance of newness, when in fact...
Well, spit is a perfect example of this, certainly, but yes, it is always debatable. One word that I recently included in Jargon Watch is hygroelectric, H-Y-G-R-O, electric. This is a term for electricity that is generated by the moisture in the air, essentially the way that lightning gets its energy. And there is the possibility at some stage in the future that this may be a source of power. We don't know that yet. The term is not a case of marketing by a company, but rather by a university researcher who wants to get this idea into circulation. And I think that it is a very positive thing in this case for this word to have been coined to get us interested in hydroelectricity, and therefore to gain the support structure by which hydroelectricity might actually become something viable. If it doesn't, what's the harm? If it does, though, then it becomes a useful term, and I look prophetic.
Right. But when you outsource jobs, that's a polite way of not saying what's really going on. So I just think there's sort of a darker underside to sometimes to some of the things that we're talking about.
Absolutely, and this is one of the reasons why I write Jargon Watch. Another reason is to pay the rent. And this is one of the reasons why I was motivated to write a book such as this, is that language is very powerful and potentially extremely dangerous, and nobody has probably more effectively brought across that idea than has George Orwell with his Newspeak in 1984. I think that language is enormously powerful and dangerous in the way that propaganda is, but with a sufficient amount of self-consciousness, with a sufficient amount of interest taken in language as such, that we can, to some degree, inoculate ourselves from that inherent danger. And not only that, but we can actually gain insight into those invidious ideas that are being covered up by that language. It becomes a way into the world, into various underworlds that are presented to us in a seemingly innocuous way.
Yes?
If I were to say something like, let's go tweet some bacon into the cloud, would you call that a mixed metaphor? And do you think people are troubled or will increasingly be troubled by words that you're talking about here that have dual meanings in the real world and in the tech world? Is that hard to parse?
Well, tweeting some bacon into the cloud does take a bit of parsing, yes.
And
but
technology, too.
But to me, mixed metaphors are not a bad thing. To me, the mixing of metaphors is one of the ways into poetry. And poetry is a loosening of our assumptions about the world through aesthetic means and often for aesthetic ends. So I would encourage metaphors to get mixed, not only because they might end up in the New Yorker in the Stop That Metaphor section, but also because they might also lead to serendipitous connections between different fields and different phenomena. And that serendipity is also something that I am very much, I think, after in writing a book such as this. First of all, the book was written in the spirit of serendipity, and I shouldn't be telling you, my editor, this perhaps, but very much what moved me forward through the book was the sense of not knowing and that curiosity and the sort of faith that there would be some interconnections that I couldn't possibly anticipate or expect that would only come about if I allowed my incredibly various and sloppy research all to kind of accumulate in a way that I could start to see how things might interconnect, not how they do. I mean, every one of these essays is an essay in the old-fashioned sense of the word. Every one of these is a trial. And they are mutually wildly inconsistent. I am certain of that. And I see that as a sign of success, not of failure, because each one of them is very much written with the idea that you can make different interconnections between things, and there is something arbitrary about those, but there also potentially is something enlightening about those in the moment. And mixed metaphors, to me, also have that potential value.
Well, I just want to say it's been a pleasure interfacing with you.
Indeed.
I've enjoyed
Without
it.
becoming too entrenched about it.
No, certainly not. If there are no more questions, I guess we'll...
Oh, we have?
We do.
Hi, Jonathan. Can you tell us how you reduced the incredible number of probably eligible entries down to 28, and why 28, not 30?
Well, because 28 were just enough to make the book thick enough that the binder didn't get upset. There are, of course, almost an unlimited number of words that could be used, especially because my criteria became more vague as I worked more on the book. Initially, I was thinking in terms of words from the last 5 years, and then it became 10, and then 20, and then recent in whatever interpretation happened to serve me for a given word that interested me. And that really is what motivated each one of these chapters, was that the word interested me as language, or interested me in terms of the field that it came from. And I had the sense that somehow exploring that would lead me to understand something, or at least to think about something about language that I didn't really have worked out. For example, why some words succeed and others fail, which motivated me to write about bacon, which is a notable failure and a well-documented one, which I could compare to the word spam, or because that word came from a field where I think that the field is very interesting in its own right, and the language in that field has a great deal to do with what is actually happening within that field. And physics is a great example of this, in which, for example, the word unparticle, as a purely speculative term, actually embodies a great deal of the speculative nature inherent in the field and what is productive about the field, as well as what is potentially deadening or what potentially leads the field astray.
Language will adapt to the loss of obscenities in modern times, because that psychology is part of human cognition, and yet what used to be words that couldn't be used in public, or major politicians drop the F-bomb, and children growing up exposed to or in films and that kind of thing. Would the language produce new obscenities? Has the language deal with that situation?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, obscenity seems to me to be an incredibly rich part of our language. Shakespeare agrees with me on this, in spite of the fact that Shakespeare also spoke Panglish. I don't know that there are going to be any technologically based obscenities in the near future, though you would say that interfacing might, in fact,
well, there certainly are usages that that offend you because they're just obscene use of the English language. But there are only so many body parts. They're not going to invent new things that people find objectionable.
So what one wonders as robotics advances and
and they'll invent a word
become
like,
a bit less clear about who we are and
what was he doing?
Are.
He was squelching his robot. You'll not be able to say that word. That's true. I hadn't thought about the robotics angle.
Well, and also, how will robots swear to each other?
Clank. I don't know. Well, then, you have the whole thing about if robots, if they get angry. You don't want your robot to get angry, so that's bad.
Well, there are laws against that.
Okay. Asimov's laws, right,
famously are against that. But I do think that it becomes interesting as we become less embodied because of our technologies, how our language, beyond the language of science and technology, perhaps changes because our sense of self changes, and therefore our needs in terms of communication change.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, you started with the word the cloud, which is very, disturbing. I find it very disturbing.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
I was wondering if there was a big response to that in your poem.
I am not prophetic. I did not manage to put that word into my column when it would have seemed new enough that my editor would have let me get away with it. So, no, there was not. There has been a great deal of consternation about it. I mean, there's a quote here, Larry Ellison saying, "It's really just complete gibberish. When is this idiocy going to stop?" This being in September of 2008. March 2009, Oracle introduced its own software as Cloud Computing Ready. So, yes, I think that people get upset about it, but the possibility of profiting from it tends to outweigh that all too often.
And people love the cloud. I mean, most people love it. The idea of putting all your pictures up on Flickr or doing your blog with WordPress, and you don't need to have your computer with you. You can go to any computer and go find your article and then blog. I mean, all of that's very convenient, but the whole idea of having everything that you've ever thought